And really the way that I like to approach this is think about Stacy, a staffing company. So what are the items, let's pretend you're a brand new staffing company or any business and you're going to a business, what are the things that you have to do, right? And so that's really what we're doing is we're taking those items that someone has to do to run a business from a financial perspective, and we're really going to mirror that in AdaptSuite from a setup, moving from the admin to the actual records in the system. Okay, so almost there, guys. All right, so I have my screen shared and I have just a PowerPoint. All it sees is corporation. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we'll be moving through these slides, and then Stacy, if on your end, I want you to log into that client services environment if you're not already, and then we'll kind of be bouncing back and forth between my screen and yours. Okay. So really where we're starting then from an administrative perspective, and really if you think about your business, is I have to set up a corporation. So if you're an employer, and I'm a new staffing company, I have to register with the federal government as an employer and get an FEIN, and there you go, you have a business, congratulations. So you have to do that across the board, and that's really all a corporation represents in AdaptSuite. It's just a placeholder. So as we're recording financial transactions in the database, those are all tied to that corporation record. Something that can confuse new users to the system is that a corporation has absolutely nothing to do with record access or permissions in the system. It is really just for financial purposes. So there's no corp restriction on who can see what. That's all at the branch level, which we learned about kind of on the front office side. Corporation has nothing to do with permissions. There's a loose relationship with a branch that we'll talk about a little bit as we move forward, but it's really just a placeholder for those transactions. Does that make sense? Okay. I'll take silence as acceptance in this case.
Yes.
There we go.
I was on mute. Yes.
So moving forward, we need to talk about the things that go into a corporation. So what we'll see shortly, Stacy, is that setting up a corporation is really easy. I add a corporation, I add the address and the phone number, and there we go, and we're done, right? No, we have a couple of items that are required that we really have to lay down. Mike.
Oh, don't worry about it. I'm sorry.
That's all right. So the next thing we have is a bank account. So a bank account in AdaptSuite is really just a payroll account. So it serves no other purpose. We wouldn't set up bank accounts that we use for accounts payable or anything like that. These are just bank accounts that were used for payroll. All right, and those bank accounts can be very simple. If we're just setting up one to use to cut regular checks, there's really not a lot to it. If we're going to use it for direct deposit, we'll need to set up the format that's specific to the bank, which are all pretty similar. We'll look at that together shortly. Next are items that could be used on an invoice. So is there a DBA name for the corporation, the address, the next invoice number, the company logo? Those are all things that we can pull in to a custom, really in either format, I believe, at this point, from the reporting and analytics tool or on the old Jasper versions that we still use. And in some cases, those items like the address might get pulled into government reporting files. But so although it doesn't require it, you might have some issues down the line if we don't put these things in. The next invoice number initially is not required, but it will then store that. So if I'm running billing, I process billing starting with invoice number 100. I run 10 invoices. It'll store the next invoice number as 111. So when I go to process billing again, it will remember that. All right, and beyond that, we'll move into the state setup and workers' comp setup. What I'd like us to do now is I'm just going to flip back to you, Stacy, and we'll walk through setting up a corporation and looking at these items, and then we'll flip back to me, okay? So I will make you the presenter. And so when you get a chance, just show your screen. And you can use just our client services environment. We'll just set up a new corp, and we can always just delete it when we're done just so we don't clutter up the system, but that's no big deal. I just want to walk you through the steps. So what you can do is go to the administration area at the top. That's right. And item number 1 in financial administration is manage corporations. So let's click on that magnifying glass there to take us into the corporation area. And we have several corporations in here. At the bottom, we have a button that says Add. So let's go ahead and do that. And you can call it whatever you want, Stacy's Corp or something along those lines, doesn't matter. We'll probably just delete it at some point. And I think when you tab out or click out, it might just populate the same DBA name, which is fine in this case. Those are different fields in the database that we could pull in as needed on an invoice. And then the federal EIN number, it does require, what is it, 9 digits? It's going to be 2 digits and a dash. And it'll tell us if we don't put the right number of digits in there. Got it. So we must have done it correctly. So as you can see, initially it really is. It's just that placeholder. There's an FEIN. That's it. Now to fill in some of those other items, we need to actually click on the corporation name to take us into the record. So if we'd like to have an address, that's right, we can click Edit and go ahead and add in that information. So next, invoice number, we can really leave blank initially because the first time they process billing, it'll be blank and they'll put something in and it'll record that at this point. So let's go ahead and put an address in. The attention to field, I don't necessarily know if that has any bearing other than we could pull it into a remittance area of an invoice because it's in the database. But for now, we can leave that blank. It's possible it's used in a government reporting file, but I'm not aware of it. So let's just put in any old address here. Enchanted Oak, that's exciting. And then let's put in a phone and a fax number can also appear on an invoice as well, and those could get pulled into government reporting files too. All right, let's hit save. Now we also need to, on the left, go to the bank accounts area, which is what we talked about. So I don't have to have a bank account in the system, so I can actually go in and put transactions in, proof and post time cards, do all of that stuff, but when I go to process payroll, if I don't have a bank account, I'm not going to be able to. There's nothing to tie the checks to in the database. So let's go ahead and click Add at the bottom to add that bank account record. Account ID and name, I don't quite frankly know why we have different fields for those. They can essentially be the same thing. You know, I always typically recommend someone use the bank name in there so that they're aware long term, was this a Bank of America account, a Wells Fargo account, something that gives them something descriptive. So if they go to have multiple accounts over time, they have some frame of reference. That's right. So Bank of America payroll, or if they have one that they use for direct deposit and one for regular checks, they can put something like that in the bank name, Bank of America direct deposit or Bank of America payroll. A lot of people use the same account for both, but some people still do use different accounts for regular checks versus direct deposit. So there we can see the next check number, next direct deposit number. Again, the first time we process payroll in this bank account, it will force us to put those in, and then it will store the next check number, next direct deposit number for us. We don't need to put anything in there right now. Maximum check handling. Go ahead and click on that selector for me. So what happens then is if you let's say, hey, there's really very little reason that we would issue a check in a week for over $2,500. You could have it do one of two things. One, just put a diagnostic that we would see in the processing, or do not issue, in which case it would deselect the time card and give us that in the diagnostic as well and not pay it due to the maximum. So why don't we put issue diagnostic here? And then let's put a maximum check amount in there, $2,000 or something like that. Excellent. So the check template and advice template, these are the base Jasper report templates that are delivered with every installation. So for now, that's completely acceptable to put in here. Long term, if someone, almost every customer that's going to print payroll checks will have a custom check report, and perhaps a custom direct deposit advice report, depending on if they're going to print or have anything special they need to go on there. And what we would do later is come into the bank account record and update it. So we would create a check report that's like payroll check main custom, or the name of the client or something like that. And then we need to tell the bank account which one to point to in the database, or excuse me, on the server. So for now, we can leave those intact. And we'll get more into that, with an implementation when you have it. So let's hit confirm. So at this point, we have a bank account record that we're looking at. This will allow us then to process regular payroll checks. That's all we need. We need the name of the account, what check template to point it to, and that's really it. Now, if we want to process direct deposit, we need a little bit more setup. So you see that whole bottom portion that we didn't see on initial entry around direct deposit. So we have to set up all of the fields that are needed. And so big picture, what the system does, Stacy, is once we process direct deposit and figure out those net amounts, it's going to create the file that someone can upload to their bank to transmit the funds, the ACH file. So we have to tell it, well, what is the bank expecting? First of all, what's the routing and account number, and then what other things is it expecting in these fields. In many cases, it's very similar. Company ID in most cases is something around their FEIN, although it could be bank specific. And so usually what happens is we gather specs from them. So we'll find out what bank they use. If, oh, hey, it's Wells Fargo. Oh, I've done Wells Fargo setup, so you can mimic what you did for another client. Or they can give us a specification sheet that they get from their bank's treasury management department. So what I want you to do, if you want to update some of these direct deposit fields, is you click that little pencil icon right next to where it says direct deposit enabled. And then it will allow us to put these items in. So routing and account number, we need those for direct deposit, but we also have the ability to put on a payroll check report. Someone wants to say, have the system print out what we call the Micker encoding line. So Stacy, if you look at the bottom of a check, you see all those funky characters. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So we have the ability to put those on the check template and pull the routing number and the account number out of the database and place those directly on the report so they don't have to have them pre-printed. But we have to store those in the database somewhere. So it's a little bit misleading, even though this said its area is for direct deposit. This is where we would store the routing and account number if we need to be able to pull those from the database. Otherwise, we would have to just hard code them on the report canvas, which is not ideal, because then if they change banks, we have to change the report. So why don't we go and put a routing number in here. If you need, it will check probably for a valid one. I think I can give you one, 061 000 227. And then you can put whatever you want in account number. And then typically in the company ID and all that stuff, where we would get those fields from the client, why don't you just put like the number 1 in all of those for now, just as placeholders, just so it will allow us to process direct deposit. There we go. And in the we have a maximum advice handling, which is very much like the maximum check handling. So when you see the word advice, that's just that's a direct deposit check. Remember when I started here, I'm like, what the heck is an advice? I just never heard that term before. It's the stub you get, right? So it used to be when you got direct deposit, you'd print out the stub and then you'd put it in your desk and then you'd have a big stack of them and you'd shred them up eventually. Now a lot of times we just deliver those online, right? So in the maximum advice handling, you can have the same behavior, issue diagnostic, or prevent it from issuing. And it's the same behavior. Okay, very good. Now, in a maximum advice amount, we have 1, so we would probably get diagnostic on everyone, right? So maybe we can change that to that 2,000 number like we did on the payroll checks. Now, the last thing that I always forget to do on here is I'll fill in all these fields, and then I'll forget to check the active box in the upper right. So let's go ahead and do that. Otherwise, we won't be able to process direct deposit payroll. All right, and we'll talk more about this setup when we go to actually set one up for a client. Have you gather the specs and then walk you through the setup. It'll make more sense at that point. So let's hit confirm here. We also have the ability on a bank account record to store what we call a positive pay format. So Stacy, are you aware of what positive pay is?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
It's the amount that the company puts in the bank so that if any checks over that amount comes in, they will not be cashed.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's the regular checks that you're going to cut for this check date that you can kind of send to the bank. So it's an anti-fraud measure, right?
Right.
People, so they can know what to expect from you. So people, if they're trying to create bad checks, they'll, hey, this doesn't tie back to what you sent us. So
Right.
click on that positive pay format. We'll walk through this. It's very client specific, but this allows us to put the format in. You know, some companies it's really easy. It's just a CSV document with the check number and the date and the amount. In some cases, it's really wacko fixed link text with a header and a footer and all this. So we have the ability to create either. And again, that's just based on the client specifications. So what's pretty slick about this is there's just a workflow you run. It will create it on the server and then deliver it to them. It doesn't require a custom report or anything like that. Now, there are some instances where we've had to do custom reports if there was something outside the bounds of what this could do, and the reporting and analytics tool allows us to do that. But this is the preferred method. We don't have to, the client doesn't have to have us create a custom report or run it. So whatever you can do in here, this is the way to handle it. All right, let's hit close on the right side. So we're done with our bank account setup. And let's see, let's take a look at our corporation. The company logo area, we talked about that. So if you upload the company logo here, you can tie that back and pull it in on an invoice or on a check, both in the Jasper report and I believe with 3.6 we can pull that into the reporting and analytics invoice report as well. You can certainly hard code images on invoice reports as well. So if they have, you know, one corp or you have to do something strange where they have multiple logos depending on the branch or something, you might need to do that. But this is again the preferred method. That way if they change their logo or they have multiple corps, you can pull it from the database instead of having to deal with it on the report canvas. And then if they change their logo, they don't have to call us and have us fix it on the report. Let's click left on the federal W-2 reporting section. I believe when we create a new corp, it automatically puts in our federal unemployment rate and wage base. There is some stuff in here that we probably want to put in, like the federal minimum wage, so I want to go ahead and click edit there. There are deductions that might look at the federal minimum wage, like a garnishment to make sure someone's taking home the right pay. It might be diagnostics that look at the federal minimum wage, and I think it's still $7.25. The W-2 reporting information, we'd need that in there by the end of the quarter or end of year, so that gets pulled in potentially to the green shades file. So the W-2 reporting context is actually a lookup for a user, and then the notification code and employment code, your client should have knowledge of what they want to put in those items as well. Any questions, Stacy, so far on the corp setup?
No.
Okay. Anyone else on the call have any questions this far? Okay. All right, one other item, you can go ahead and save this. One other item we won't go into detail on, but I want to mention is the fees set up on the left. So what are fees? Those are typically for ACA cost recapture. So Stacy, I don't know if your company did anything around that you came from, but that allows someone to say, hey, we want to, because of ACA, charge a percentage of bill or in a flat amount, you know, a nickel an hour to our clients explicitly to say, hey, we're charging you this because of ACA and what we have to do now. So you can set that. Yeah, go ahead.
I do have a question on that. We did do some of that, but my question is, if I put it here, does it go across the board to all clients, or will I be able to pick specific clients?
It's an excellent question. So if we put that at the corp level, it will default to every client, but then you can override it at the client level. So that's a decision. So if it's a situation where, well, we do it for most of our clients or the majority of our clients, we put it in here and then we deal with it. There's permission around who can override it at the client level. So you put it in here and then override it when you need to. Otherwise, I believe you can not put it in here and then set the fee up in the pay bill code area and just add it to the companies that need it.
Okay.
And there's also non-ACA fees. So I've seen two practical uses for those. One, I have a client that does business in San Francisco, and so they have all kinds of crazy stuff. And so I think they rolled out the sick time before anyone else, sick time policy. So they were charging just a fee for any of their clients that had work locations in San Francisco. Say, hey, if you guys want to do business with us, sorry, it costs us more money. We're passing this along to you. So they created was an ACA, but they created a fee, and they would only put it on their San Francisco clients. We can also use, we found how we can use negative fees to act as a discount, right? So if you have a customer that you give a discount or something like that, you can create a negative fee on that company, and then it actually calculates on the invoice explicitly as a discount. So people, if you ever have anyone that asks, well, we don't have discounts in AdaptSuite. We don't, but we could create a fee called discount and on the company put it in as a negative, and it works great. So we have a few clients using that. So keep that in the back of your mind. There's excellent documentation around cost recapture and fee setup in the ACA guide, and it's really pretty straightforward if you follow through with it.
Okay.
All right, so we are done with our corp setup. So as you can see, there's really not a lot to it. Any other questions from you or anyone else before we move on?
I don't have any.
Okay. All right, so what I'll do then is flip back to me for a little bit. And we'll then talk about where we need to move on. I'm getting some echo. I don't know if someone has unmuted me or something. Getting some pretty good echo there. Sounds a little bit better. So the next thing we need to do, again, think about, I'm a new staffing company. All right, so I've got my corporation with the federal government. I've got my bank account set up with the bank. I've got an office, and I've got that all set up in AdaptSuite. What do I need to do next? Well, I might need to register with the state. So if I'm in the state of Texas, we wouldn't necessarily have to worry about income tax, right, if I'm remembering that correctly, but we might have to worry about unemployment. So you might have to pay unemployment tax to the state, or if I'm doing business in Georgia, I have to worry about, just registering with the state as an employer to remit state income tax withholding as well as unemployment. So we have to set up in AdaptSuite to mirror that. You've had to register with all these states. I need to go and set that up in AdaptSuite, because what will happen if I don't is I will not be able to create a job order in those work locations if I don't have them set up. So under the state, we might do several things. So we'll do some really basic things like, what's your tax ID with the state? Does that state have a minimum wage that's different than the federal? Again, we might have garnishment formulas that look at a state minimum wage, and then also just indicating that this state is active for the corporation. Next, we'll set up unemployment tax info. So what's the wage base for the state? What is our rate? And then do we have an unemployment identification number, and when is this effective? And we'll talk more about that effective date in a little bit. So do you know what I mean, Stacy, by wage base?
Sorry, I had you on mute. No, I do
problem.
not.
Okay, good. And quite frankly, for you or anyone else on this phone, I didn't know most of this stuff when I started here. Just learn it and pick it up, and there's things, unless you're dealing with this stuff, I mean, don't make any assumptions. I didn't know a lot of it. And some people think I know things about this now. At least I can sound like I do. So the wage base is, okay, so I have to pay unemployment tax to the state entities and to the federal government. So what that means is, if you go and file for unemployment, you get laid off, you know, you get some amount of money, right, while you're looking for a job. So before I started here, I never really thought about where that came from. Well, the government just pays for that. Well, they do, but based on taxes that they levy to employers. So a wage base means that, let's say in Georgia, I think it's $9,500 is the wage base. So what that means is if I employ someone in Georgia, the first $9,500 I pay to them in a calendar year, I have to pay tax on those wages.
Yes, okay, I do know what you're talking about.
Yep. And so that rate, you know, you have a rate that's 5% and the wage base is $9,500. So you pay 5% of their taxable wages up to $9,500, and after that you don't pay. So oftentimes staffing companies might have reports to find out who's hit their wage base. We want to employ those people because we pay less tax on those individuals once they've hit their wage base. So that probably sounds familiar now. All right, so that's the wage base and the rate. And you'll see that wage base is just all over the board with the different states. And then it'll correspond to a rate, right? So someone might have a huge wage base and then a low rate, and some other state might have a low wage base and a high rate. They're going to get it somewhere. And there'll be some other items potentially on a state setup. So those might be very specific. There's some only apply to certain states. And then if local taxes, local tax settings area, and that's really a what we deal with from a Vertex perspective, and then passing to our part shades that we use for the government reporting. Okay, and we'll talk a lot more about that down the road. All right, and then after that, so we'll go through that in the workers' comp here in a setup. So we've set up our state. Then we need to set up workers' comp. So if I'm going to be a staffing company, I need to have workers' compensation insurance so that if someone gets coverage for that. So what do I need in ADAPT Suite? I need to set up the codes and descriptions, which is very easy, and then the detail entries. So that's always a combination of the code, the state, and the corporation. And what will happen when I create an order is it's going to verify, hey, in administration, if I say I want to pick 8810, do I have a rate set up for that code in that state where I'm picking the work location and that corporation? If I don't, I'll get an error and won't be able to create the order. So any of you that have ever done any QA, you've probably run into this, and it drives you absolutely nuts. So you always have to have all of this set up before you try and create these records. All right, so Stacy, let's flip it back to you. Excellent. All right, so you can close out of the corp on the right. And yep, close out of Manage Corporations. And let's start with the state setup. So let's go to Manage State Taxes, which is number 6 on your list. Sales tax, we'll talk about that a bit later. And I think you did Texas right, is where your corporation is located. So let's go find Texas in the list. So what we see on here is a listing of all of our corporations. And then what I want you to notice, it's a little bit confusing. For whatever reason, we have the corporation active indicator first, which is just telling us that the corporation itself is active. Over at the end, which is what's most important to us, is where it says it's active or not for the state. See what I mean? So if we scroll to the top of this, you'll notice that I think the training corporation is set up for Texas. It says it's active. We've got a state minimum wage, but none of the other ones are. So why don't we find your corp in the list, and let's select the little radio button next to it. That's okay. Just hit back at the top or close. That actually took us into the corp record itself. So what we want to do is use the little radio button to select it and then say Edit at the bottom. And let's put an ID number in here. That's alphanumeric. It'll take dashes and all of that. You can put in whatever you want. All right, and if you're aware of what Texas minimum wage is, go ahead and put that in. If not, just put in $7.25. The rehire period, I believe that's used for the new hire reporting functionality. Are you aware of the concept of new hire reporting?
We did something with it, but ours was if they were rehired after 120 days, they were considered a rehire. I don't know if this is a concept.
Yeah, the whole deal with new hire reporting is basically, I believe, for child support, so that, you know, if someone owes, you know, they have child support orders, you're always reporting to the state that you've hired someone so that they can cross-reference with that, so people can't just bounce around and try and dodge child support. So the rehire period, I believe, you know, if you're a staffing company, hire someone, you report them as a new hire, they don't work, and then a month later you hire them again, it's not going to re-report them if it's inside 60 days. That's what that's for. And then let's check the box for the active indicator. It tells us that the corporation is actively doing business in the state of Texas, and confirm. All right, so that's easy enough. Now we can see that's been filled out completely. And then on the left, we can go to the Manage State Unemployment Information. So similar concept, we would find your corporation in the list, use the radio button, select it, and do View/Edit.
Hey, Adam, this is Kelly. I have a quick question.
Yep, sure.
So what happens when you're dealing with a client that does business in a whole lot of states, and maybe they've never done payroll before, and they are clueless when it comes to these rates, whether it be minimum wage, whether it be unemployment, I mean, any of these things. How do you help them figure out where to get that information rather than just supplying it to them, because we can't do that?
Well, I mean, someone's going to have that, right? So whether it's their current payroll provider, you know, typically they would get that information from them. So whoever's processing payroll is going to have this type of information. So it's either they're aware of it and they have it, or they would get it from their current provider so they could put that in here.
Okay.
All right. In this case, if we want to put an unemployment ID in, we do need to click the workflow button that will pop up and allow us to put that unemployment ID in. So let's go ahead and do that. What will happen is you'll get diagnostics in the government reporting process if you don't put these ID numbers in. And in my experience in implementation, you'll go to work with a client on this. Well, I don't have that in front of me. I'll put it in later. They don't. And then they'll get to the end of the government reporting process, and their file will fail because they didn't set this stuff up. So it's always good to hammer people as much as you can at the beginning. Don't let this slide. Put it in, or you're going to be it's going to be October 25th, and you have to go in and set up all your state info because you forgot the beginning of the implementation. Because the payroll process doesn't care if they don't have an unemployment ID in here. The government reporting process does. So there's no enforcement of this stuff until you get to government reporting. So the ID number, in some cases, that may be the same as the state tax ID number that they put in on the other screen, or different department might be different. So it could, and it's just going to vary by state. So why don't we just put something in there? All right, now the unemployment information is a little bit different. We actually have a grid here that we can have multiple entries in, and the concept behind this is the effective dates. So why don't you hit the plus button, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So we'll add a new unemployment rate entry in this grid. So the effective date, yeah, just put maybe January 1st, 2016, something like that. And then the state rates, we don't know, just put some 5% or something like that. And then the wage bases are actually really easy to get just on Google. I mean, there's American Payroll Association publishes all that for people, but I don't know, let's just put $10,000. The employment training tax rate is California specific. So we have that in here. The only challenge I see with that is we don't really have it broken out specifically on any reports, but that's lumped in with their SUTA. And then there's some surcharge fields here. Those are for specific states, I believe, like maybe Kentucky, where they were behind with the feds and then they got a bond or something so that you still get your credit, but then they charge a surcharge. So it's, for government reporting, it's broken out. Where a lot of states that do that, they let you just lump the surcharge in. Some states want you to break it out specifically. I think we had to put that in for Kentucky. So let's hit confirm. Now the reason we have this grid is so you can have like a rate history. So if I know on January 1st, 2017 that the wage base is going to go up to 10,500, as if it would ever go down, and my rates are going to change based on my claims, instead of having to wait until 2017, you could actually put that in ahead of time. And then theoretically the timesheet posting process and the costing process would look at these effective dates when interpreting the unemployment burden, and we'll talk more about burden in a little bit. So you can have a rate hit. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask, if that's in the middle of a payroll week, does it calculate half of the week at the old rate and half of the week at the new rate?
So payroll is always by check date. Right?
Got it.
So,
okay.
So the government doesn't care what the work period was. They care about when it was paid out. So
okay.
That's what it would use. And then on the timesheet posting side for accrual, it would just look at the work period ending date, not the entirety of the work period. But it's a fair question. You don't have to put, you could go and edit that entry and just change the rate next year, or you could have the entries if you want to maintain that history and that kind of thing. Does that make sense, Stacy?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's close that screen just using the X in the upper right of the workflow. So we've set up the unemployment and the state ID information. At this point, we've done what is required for us to be able to put a job order in for the state of Texas, right? Now there's other sections here on the left, state disability info, state local reporting, that we might need to fill out for government reporting purposes depending on the state. We don't have to do that right now. One thing I want to show you is go to that state/local reporting segment real quick. And then same thing, let's find your corp and do the edit. So this is where you might put in the W-2 reporting contact info for the state, just like we did on the federal. And as you can see, there are some specific just kind of line items for, like, what is that, New Jersey, North Dakota, Maine, where we just didn't really have a good place to put those, I guess, so we stuck them on here that are specific to those states. The only thing that you would need to put in here by government reporting time is the state W-2 reporting contact notification code and employment code. But we don't need to do that now. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we can't look anyone up because we haven't created anyone for this.
Well, well, so again, this is just going to look up users in ADAPT Suite.
Okay.
So you could look up yourself, or if you're helping a client set this up, they might pick whoever their accountant is, or whoever does their government reporting. But you're right, oftentimes you're doing this setup before you've set up all your users.
Right.
So if they haven't set up all their users yet, they have to come back and do this later. Again, it's just one of those checklist items that you want to make sure they have in here. Now, the nice thing about GreenShades is if you're missing something like this, a lot of times GreenShades will let you just plug it in GreenShades, like, oh, we don't have the email address of your W-2 reporting contact. Well, you don't necessarily have to go back in ADAPT Suite and do it. You can do it right in GreenShades. But this will prevent that. This will prevent that.
Okay.
All right, so let's cancel that. So that's really all of the state setup that we need at this point. The local tax settings, that's really all we need for places like Pennsylvania and Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, where GreenShades uses certain codes for these local entities. But then we have Vertex geocodes, and it's really just a translation. So what we see is, well, we have Pennsylvania and this PSD code. We want to output, and we have a spreadsheet from GreenShades, this out to the file so they can deal with it how they want to deal with it. So really, we'll look at that probably the first time you have a client that's in one of those states. So it's just a question you always want to ask with an implementation is, find out what states they're doing business in, and then, hey, do any of those states have local taxes that we need to worry about? And then we might need to deal with the local tax settings area. All right, let's close our state then on the right, and then we can close out of the Manage State Taxes area. And now if you remember, the next thing from the PowerPoint was the Manage Workers' Comp codes. So the first thing, if you recall, was we needed to set up the codes and descriptions. So this is really easy. Why don't you just click Add. The code and the description. Pretty simple. So if you can think of one from your staffing days, feel free to go ahead and put it in. Excellent. And let's confirm. We're done, right?
Okay, I have a question about this. I know that the workers' comp codes vary depending on what state you're in.
Right.
So how do we know, like when we get ready to use them, if it is a Texas code, Arkansas code?
My experience is most of the states use the same codes.
Okay.
But some states like California and Pennsylvania might have their own. You might be able to some degree, someone might need to understand what the appropriate code is to pick when they create an order. There has to be some training there. But keep in mind, there's going to be enforcement when we create an order. So if I'm in Pennsylvania, and I'm trying to use 8810, which is not a Pennsylvania code.
Right. And
I go try and create it, it's going to say, hey, we're not seeing that 8810's been set up for Pennsylvania for this corporation.
Got it. Okay.
So although they might not know what to pick, it's not going to let them pick something that's not potentially valid for that state.
Okay.
So let's click on the then workers' compensation detail on the left. Now, workers' compensation codes, a front office only environment, they can have codes and descriptions and they can pick them on their job orders. It doesn't require it. The workers' compensation detail area that we see here is for only the front and back office customers. So this is where we would go in and define for Texas and Stacey's Corp, what are the codes and rates that can be available for use? Okay, so why don't we click Add then, and we'll add your 8817 that you created. And so you can just type in that code in the first box and just tab out. There we go, and then pick your corporation. State, yep, and you can even type in the abbreviation in tab. You've probably noticed that. State rate type, so let's selector. So I think this is where it's going to calculate, is it based on, I think it's per $100 of wages, what is the tax or the burden versus is it based on hours? I've never actually worked with anyone that uses the hours calculation before. And then the state rate, so whatever that might be, you know, what is 8817? Oh, warehouse, so maybe it's 5 or 10 or something like that, whatever. So as you can see, it goes out to a bunch of digits, and then an effective date. So the same concept applies there as unemployment. We can set effective dates, and this is actually more useful on the workers' comp side. So why don't we just backdate that to something. Okay, so that's all that's required, but let's talk about some other fields. And the one I want to point out to you is the employer burden rate. So oftentimes what we'll see is that a staffing firm will receive like a policy from their provider that says, well, typically in Texas for 8817 the rate's $5 per $100 in wages. But you guys, based on your claims history, we've applied a modifier. So it's 1.1. So that means that your rate is actually, you know, 5.05 or whatever it might be, whatever the modifier is. And that's where they can put in their employer burden rate versus what the state rate for that provider would be. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the employer burden rate is not the modifier, but the modified rate. So if the modifier is 1.1, we would not put 1.1 in there. We would put 5 times 1.1. Does that make sense? So some people don't, if you explain this to them, they're like, well, we don't know what our modifier is. We don't have that. I would just tell them to put the same thing in both fields. Okay, I think what the system will do is if you leave employer burden rate blank, it's just going to use the state rate. But I always like to fill in both. And what you'll see on the workers' compensation report is it outputs both calculations, so someone could see what their modified burden is versus what it would have been, you know, without that modifier. The employee portions, employee tax type and rate, I think that's only Washington and Oregon that we would need to worry about that, where there is employee withholding on workers' comp. There's a checkbox that says include overtime as premium. Typically that is unchecked. That would mean that, you know, I think for workers' comp, although you might pay a premium of wages to an employee for working overtime, your workers' comp doesn't necessarily expect that premium, right? Just because they work overtime doesn't necessarily mean there's any more chance of an injury. So that would only be if you did have to pay a premium 1.5 times the wages. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah, unfortunately,
right.
Clients figured that out too.
Oh, there you go. I have seen people use that just in case they want to accrue additional towards workers' comp, but most of the time that's unchecked. Any questions, Stacy, or anyone else on this screen before we move on?
I don't have any.
Okay. All right. So let's hit confirm. So now we have everything that we need in the system to create a job order. We've got our corp set up. We've got our managed, for the state of Texas, I should add. We've got our state set up. We've got at least one workers' comp code set up for Texas. So we're really moving along and setting up our staffing business. We've got the essentials in there. All right, so let me flip back to me for a minute. And we'll talk then about some other setup items. Just a second. All right, so this is where we left off. Next, we're going to really then talking about starting to set up the entities that would allow us to start doing our batch financial transaction processing, right? And so the first thing that we need to do, and by the way, that's kind of half of the admin setup on the financial side. There's more around pay bill codes and deductions that we haven't really talked through. But we'll probably do that next time when we really start talking about putting time cards into the system. We'll talk about those. Okay, we might touch on deductions today. All right, so employee, right? So we actually don't call them employees in ADAPT Suite, we call them candidates. When we talk about the financial side of it, though, they always are employees, right? They're employees of the staffing firm. So that's the terminology I'm using. In reality, that's a candidate with a financial piece activated, which then allows us to set up some of these items that we'll look at next, such as the payroll and tax record. So the payroll and tax records really, if you think about, again, you're a new staffing business, you have someone in the door that's you want to assign to a job. What do you have to get from them? Well, you have to get their W-4. If they're in Texas, that might be all you need. If they're in Georgia, you would need to get their G4 state tax form and get that filled out. And we'll talk a little bit about how do we know how to set things up for a state, and that's why we have something in here for tax digests. Next, does this employee have any deductions? So if you're a staffing firm that offers insurance or 401k that are those voluntary deductions, well, I guess insurance may not be voluntary anymore. Anyway, you know, do they have child support or garnishment or something like that that we need to set up? And then direct deposit. So are we going to pay this employee via direct deposit? Have they filled out a form with their account information? We need to get that into the system as well. And then benefit programs. We won't attempt to cover an exhaustive review of eligibility today because that would be terrible for everyone on the call, right, for us to spend the next hour scratching the surface of eligibility. But we'll talk about where it is on the employee, when that needs to be on there, etc. But that is in the employee financial area. Okay. So what I'd like us to do then, Stacy, is let's get candidate, and you can create one real quick if we need to, and we'll just walk through start to finish, setting up this employee and preparing them to be put on assignment. So let me flip it back to you. So if you've got someone that you've created recently that does not have any employee financial information, great. If not, we can just throw someone in there.
I don't think this one does.
All right. So first thing we need to do then, we'll look at Todd, is go to his personal information area, which is a segment on the left, about midway down. Okay, so it looks like you did put a Social Security number for him. Now let's go in the upper right to employee financial, and let's see if you've already put in a payroll and tax record for him as well. So you've got a section in the upper right of his record, so above his edit button where it says employee financial. Do you see that? And let's go to the payroll/taxes segment on the left.
Oh, I did.
Okay, so this guy's set up. So why don't we start with someone else, because I'd really like for you and everyone else to really talk through this from start to finish. If we need to just throw someone new in the system, that's fine too. All right, so this person looks clean. So let's go to that personal information. So step one is we need to make sure that we have a social. So how do we add that social in here? We need to click on the Add Confidential Information. All the system's going to care about is social. We don't have to have any of this other stuff in here. Date of birth might be relevant for the payroll process if we're talking about certain types of deductions with catch-up provisions like a 401k. If you're over the age of 50 or whatever, you get to have extra 401k come out. We might need to have a birth date in for those, but otherwise the system won't care. All right, let's confirm. Now that we've got the social in, we can go to the candidate activities menu on the right side of your screen, and there should be a workflow in there that says activate employee financial towards the bottom of that menu. So for your front office only customer, they could add the social in just the same way under add personal information, but they would not get the menu item for activate employee financial. And so the reason, why do we have this segmented off? That's the reason, right? So we can sell the system with all of this hidden and not force people to use it, right? So that's why it's kind of segmented off the way it is. So the summary of the employee financial history, or excuse me, area is their check history. Nothing in here yet. We haven't even prepared this employee to pay, so we need to go on the left to the payroll and taxes area, and then we can add a payroll and tax record. So if your company, your staffing firm that you're running in here, there are multiple corporations. If an employee is going to potentially work for both of those different corporations, we would need to set up multiple payroll and tax records. All right, so let's hit Add. Employee type, so that is whether they're a W-2 employee or a 1099 contractor. I think overall we're probably seeing a lot less 1099 staffing than we used to. And then the corp. So let's pick either the training corporation or your corporation. It doesn't matter. And then we'll talk about what's required. Check handling is not a required field. You can leave that blank. If you want to look at that, that allows someone to process and sort checks and direct deposit devices in a certain way. So I want to print or process people that are picking up their check in the office, or whatever that might be. They can use check handling for that. Wage type is required. So I believe that is hourly versus salaried employee. And then pay frequency, so weekly, biweekly, etc. All right, so then we need to put in federal filing status. So federal, this is always, we have all these options. It's always just going to be single or married on federal. So there's a box on the W-4 that says married but withhold at higher single rate. Well, what would we put in there? We would put single. We would put single. So if they specifically say, I want to be withheld at the higher single rate, you put single in there. So it's single or married. Because there's no difference from a federal tax withholding perspective in single and married but withhold at single rate. Right? So it's going to do the same thing. So that we get that question a lot. What do I put if someone does that? You put single.
Hey, Adam, what if someone works lives in the tri-state area, like Pennsylvania, Northern New Jersey, New York, and they may work in multiple states, and you may have assignments for them in multiple states?
So that is at the assignment. What we're talking about right now is their residency. So if someone lives in the tri-state area, where do they live?
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get there, no worries.
So we address that in a different way. Okay.
Exactly. All right, let's see. So that's all we need on here. The tax ID number at the bottom would only be for 1099. So let's hit confirm. So here's the basics. You know, for Texas, there's never really going to be anything beyond that. All right, Texas doesn't have a state income tax unless something has changed recently. But what I want you to do is go on the left where it says tax information. So let's say that someone says, hey, can you take out an extra, $20 per paycheck for federal tax? On this page, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see all of those different additional tax, additional percent that I want to come out for federal, state, or any of the other entities, the taxing entities. Now, it's not always this easy. So if you're in a state like Georgia, let me pull up G4. I want to talk about the concept of what we call a tax digest, right? So I'm going to share my screen again real quick. So here's the state of Georgia holding certificate. So marital status, right? Well, someone says, are they A, B, C, D, or E? So how in the world do I enter that into AdaptSuite? There's really no way someone can know the answer to that question without some sort of documentation. So right now, all that documentation is currently StaffSuite documentation. We don't have any AdaptSuite documentation for that. But StaffSuite uses the same tax engine as AdaptSuite Vertex, so we can use it. And basically what it says is, based on how someone fills out this G4, this is what you should put in the filing status. Okay, and so we have tax digest, and if that changes, we might have it in some notes. So let me see if I can find that. I think long-term they're planning to create the tax digests in like online help. So here we go. So here's an example. Way back, Georgia made some changes, and we had to make changes. And here's typically what you would see in a tax digest. So, okay, if someone fills out married, filing joint, two spouse, in AdaptSuite, we would pick the filing status of other one. So again, there's no way that anyone would know that without some sort of documentation. So most states, you don't have to worry about this. There's just a handful where there's some goofy stuff, Georgia being one of them, where they have to have some sort of documentation in here, right? And another example of that is if we go on Georgia, Georgia's always a good one to talk about, is you have your personal allowances, right? So you enter 0 or 1 here, and then you have additional dependent allowances. So those affect the calculation differently on the tax side. So someone has to know on that payroll and tax record. So if I go to, I'm in the wrong system. If we go, I'll have you look on yours. If we go to your system, there's an additional field to put the dependent allowances. And again, that would be in the tax digest. Hey, if they put something in dependent allowances, put it on this field. So we really got a little bit of a shortcoming in AdaptSuite on the documentation side right now. And what we do for those states is we typically give them the StaffSuite documentation because it's really the same thing. Does that make sense? Any questions about that?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to flip it back to you then. So where would we put those dependent allowances, you've actually got a field right below the, let's see, the state tax area. So where it says filing status single, and then you have allowance 0. Do you see that?
Right here.
Actually, it's right in the middle, so kind of middle left where it says state tax area. There you go. So you see I have a field that says allowance and another one below that that says additional allowance. And not additional exempt dollar, but there's just a field that says additional allowance 0. So that's where we would, for Georgia, for example, we would put their dependent allowances in there because those affect the tax calculation differently than their personal 0-1 exemption that would go in the allowance field. Okay, so there's really no way to lump those together and have an accurate tax calculation for the state of Georgia because they do different things. Vertex needs to know them separately from each other. And it's a little bit misleading on the Georgia form because it has you add them all up. What are your total allowances? And then if you read how to calculate, you have to know what they are differently from each other. So you would put one in allowance and the other one additional allowance. And again, that would all be in the tax digest. So most states you won't have that kind of goofy stuff, but there are some really weird ones out there like Arizona where you have another field, see that one that says state withholding method. There's just some numbers that we have to use for that too. So there's different fields on the payroll and tax record that are used for different states. And the same field might be used in 2 different ways depending on what that state is. So it's always good to address and research those things when you get clients and you find out what states they're in. And you somewhat, to some degree, have to rely on the client to say, you know, do these states have anything that we need to be aware of? You know, you'll pick this stuff up over time, but to some degree you have to let them direct it and get them the documentation on those states. All right, so that was really long-winded. On the left, Kelly, we have an area called non-resident tax that we'll talk about a little bit later. But this would be where if you've got someone that lives in Kentucky and works in Indiana, and those states have an agreement that, well, the Kentucky people don't have to have Indiana tax withheld, and the Indiana people don't have to have Kentucky tax withheld, you can put in what we call a non-resident records. So if all of those states have reciprocity, you can set those up, and then it will not withhold or record taxable wages. So that might apply to your scenario, right? So we would still, on the assignment, we'll talk about indicate the work location, but at the candidate level, we would tell it if they are choosing to take advantage of that reciprocity between the states. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. All right, so that's the payroll and tax record. So it seems really easy to set up initially, and more oftentimes than not it is, but there's a lot of detail in here depending on the state that you might have to fill out. And you can even get into some really weird things like Louisiana wants a 6-digit occupational code that we have to put in. I mean, there's just a whole litany of these things that there's these fields that you won't use 99% of the time, but they're out there. Any questions from you, Stacy, or anyone else before we move off the payroll and tax record?
No.
All right then, so you can go on the right side and hit the close button to take us out of the payroll and tax record. Now I find that typically takes me back to the main candidate area, so we'll just go back to the upper right and click that employee financial link. Flip back to the financial, and the next thing about it's probably direct deposit setup, right? So got their tax information, I need to know their bank account info, so let's go to direct deposit. And there's a timing aspect to this when it comes to payroll. So when you go to enter a time card, and we'll see this probably next session, it will look at the time you're creating the time card to see does that employee have at least one active direct deposit account. And if they do, it will flag that time card to be paid via direct deposit. So what might happen a lot of times with our, you know, they get I got a new employee and I didn't get their direct deposit info, so I put the time card in and then I put the direct deposit info before I run payroll, I'll be all right. So you won't, because You put the time card in before there was a direct deposit account, and therefore the time card is flagged to be paid just via a regular check. So it's always good to tell your clients, hey, if an employee needs to be paid via direct deposit, you got to get that account info in before time cards are entered, not before payroll is processed, before time cards are entered. So let's click Add. And we'll start with the scenario of just one account, which is easy. So let's pick your corp. Distribution type, so that's going to be either amount or percent. In the example of where we have one account, that's always just going to be percent. You know, you're not going to pay a specific, if someone has one direct deposit account, you're not going to pay a specific amount to it. You're going to pay 100% of their pay towards that account. So bank name, just type in, you know, whatever it is. Again, that's useful for kind of the candidate and the staffing representative to know is, hey, do you guys still have my Wells Fargo account set up on there? I need to put my new B of A one that would have some sort of context. So let's put the bank name in. You can put in whatever you want. B of A, Wells, the usual suspects. There we go. Again, it's going to validate for a potentially valid one here, so I can give you that one. It's 061 000 227. And then account number, you can put whatever, just several numbers in there. And then account type, checking, savings, etc. And then it always defaults to authorized. Now, the reason that deposit status is even in there is I think there may be long-term plans to put in the concept of a direct deposit pre-note file. Are you familiar with that terminology?
Yes.
Okay. So AdaptSuite does not have the capability right now of creating a pre-note file. We found most of our customers and banks don't really require that anymore. It may be in their long term, but right now it's just they're going to get pulled in the file. The information needs to be right. There's no pre-noting capability. But the status is there in case we ever do roll out pre-noting. You could put in pre-note submitted or whatever. So allocation in this case would be 100. That means 100% of that person's pay is going to go into this checking account. If it was an amount type, distribution type, that would mean $100. Priority, let's just put 1 in here. And since there always has to be one residual account, and since this is the only account, it's going to be flagged as residual automatically. That's the leftovers, right? We'll talk more about that in a sec. Any questions on this screen?
No.
Okay, to confirm. So that's easy. Adding one account is always simple. If someone comes back later and says, well, you know what, actually, I want like, you know, $50 to go into savings, and then I want the rest to go in checking, which scenario, I want X amount to go into this account and then the rest to go into something else. We can do that. You can handle multiple accounts. And it gets a little bit awkward to do that after the fact. So I want to walk you through that scenario so we can become familiar with the concept of set distribution between accounts. So let's go ahead and act like we're going to add another account. So we want to add a savings account in here. And maybe let's use that scenario. I want $50 to go into a savings account.
What was that routing number?
061 000 227. In this case, yeah, let's do 50 for the allocation, and let's say priority 1. We want this now to be the number 1 account, and let's hit confirm. Hey, wait a minute, it already exists. Okay, so then we need to maybe put it to 2, and then we'll fix it later, right? So now what we need to do is we need to make some changes to this. So let's click the Set Distribution button in the lower right. And it's not obvious in here, but those fields you can actually click into. So where it says priority, we want to change that to 2 and the other one to 1. You can just click in and change those things. Okay, and we've got both set to amount, which is perfect. And then the allocation on the residual account, I get this question a lot, it doesn't really matter. So you notice how it says 100? Well, it doesn't really matter because it's the residual account. It's not going to put $100 into the account, and then it's going to, you know, they're not going to get multiple deposits or anything like that. It really says put 50 in the first one and then put the rest in the residual account. Does that make sense?
Yes.
The other thing that you have to use the set distribution area for is to deactivate accounts. So if someone calls in and says, here's my new account information, well, it's not going to let you delete the old account if it's been used. So you would use set distribution to come in and just change that activation or active flag, I'm sorry, from a yes to a no, and then confirm the distribution. So we use this for several different types of things that we might do. So let's hit confirm. Now we've got it all set. So we should see the $50 go into savings and then the rest go into checking. All right, let's look then at deductions on the left. So there are 2 places that we can record a deduction amount. The first is on here, and this would be like more for recurring type deductions on an employee. Insurance, 401k, child support garnishment. We can also record one-time deductions at the time card level. So we need to take $20 out for equipment for this employee or whatever. You know, they lost their badge, we had to give them another one, so that's $10. We wouldn't go through the trouble of setting up a deduction on the employee record for that. We would just ding them right on the time card. Right? So this is more for those recurring that needs to come out at least more than one time. All right, so let's hit that plus button. And then the code. So we'll talk a little bit more about deductions later, but these are all of the codes that we have set up in administration. Right, so child support, garnishment, 401k, etc. So why don't we pick the child support dollar deduction? And by child support dollar, in this case, we mean we're going to take out an amount of a specific amount of someone's pay versus a percentage. And let's hit confirm. And one thing I'd like you to notice, you and everyone else, on all of these setup items, payroll and tax record, direct deposit, deduction, ask for a corporation, right? So if someone's going to work in multiple corps, guess what? We need to set all of this up for both corporations, okay? So some of our customers can get pretty loosey-goosey with setting up corps and moving people around. They have to deal with this manually. All right. So pay frequency. Is this deduction supposed to come out once a week, every 2 weeks, once a month? Let's click on that selector and let's look at the options. So weekly makes sense. This employee gets paid once a week. We want it to come out once a week. Now, the one that we might use besides that is the one that says each paycheck. So an example of that might be like a 401k. So what if someone gets their regular pay and then they get like a bonus that's on a different check? Well, I would want 401k to come out of both of those, right? So I might set a 401k to each paycheck as opposed to weekly. Because if they got 2 checks in the same week, well, it's only going to come out once. Whereas on something like 401k, I might want it to come out regardless of how many checks I get in a week. So for child support, probably just set that to weekly and be done with it. And then the amount/percent field, this is where we're going to put, in this case, what the dollar amount of the deduction is. So let's say, you know, I don't know, $100 or something like that in that field. The max amount and max percent fields, those can be used by deduction formulas. So the max percent, we define in the child support and at the administration level. There's like, their order might say, well, they get to take home at least 60% of their disposable income. So in administration, we might set that, well, this order says 65%. So in that max percent field, we might say 65% or something like that. If you leave it blank on a child support order, it will just use what's in administration. So in your case, you did the max amount field. We would probably clear that out because we've really already defined our max amount as $100. But what percentage of someone's pay should come out, that's where we could define that if it should be different than what's administration, and we'll look at the administration side of it last week. Now, the dates. This is where people that are new to the system really get tripped up with deductions. So payroll, we're dealing with check dates, right? On the deduction side, it's really looking at the work period, right? So let's say that today is Tuesday. I'm inputting a deduction for an employee that's going to get paid this week for last week's time card. So does that scenario make sense? I got an order today, but I've got a time card in for this employee for last week, and I want this deduction to come out for last week's pay. I need to backdate the effective date to the work period, right? So what the payroll process does is it's going to look and see what's the work period, what's the effective date, does that effective date fall in that work period at all? If so, I'm taking the deduction. It doesn't prorate it. So if I put the effective date last Wednesday, well, is that in the work period at all? It sure is, so it's going to take it. Typically, you would backdate that to the beginning of the last work period, on Monday or Sunday or whatever it might be. But as long as that effective date start and end date range fall at all within that work period, it's going to come out. Same thing on the end date. Well, I don't want this deduction to come out for last week's check. Well, I need to backdate the end date prior to the work period. So the check date of 10/27, but the work period was 10/17 to 10/23. I need to backdate the end date to 10/16, to prior to the work period. Are you following me on that?
Yes.
Okay. We don't need to put an end date in initially because we don't really, this is kind of an ongoing deduction. End date would be for more if, you receive notice that this employee should no longer have this deduction come out. Or on the insurance side, hey, I got insurance somewhere else, or I don't want 401k to come out. You can never delete a deduction. You always just end them. All right, let's add a priority for this. So in 3.6, which is not yet on this environment, there's the concept of the involuntary deduction handling. So what if someone has multiple child support deductions? One of the ways that you can have it distribute is by priority. So which one takes precedence versus other deductions. So that can be an important field. Now, the rest of those fields that we see here are optional, but particularly on a child support deduction can be very useful, all right? So when you have to go and remit this money to these authorities, they might want you to reference a case number or something like that, or what state it is, or who is it payable to. And we have this nice new deduction register that we put out in the last release, I think, that's by payable to. So it'll group by payable to, like, state of Georgia Child Services, something like that. And then it'll print out the case number and all of that stuff on the deduction register. So at the end of the month, accounting department can run the report, get everything they need to remit to the different authorities with all the information on it, print that out and send it in. So that payable to field can become important using that new report. I'm sorry, was there a question?
So, and there's an existing report for that?
Absolutely. It just came out, I believe, in the most recent release. It's deduction register. Yep.
Okay.
And I think it's called deduction register by payable to. There was a version, an old version in the Jasper report, but it didn't have all of these fields on it. It grouped by payable to, but that was it. It didn't have the case number or any of that, and the new case and order number, and the new one has all that information in it, and it just looks a lot better.
I see it.
Cool. All right, let's hit confirm, Stacy. So that's our deduction. So that will come out on a weekly basis. Oh, did it put it in twice? That's special. Unless someone was in the system putting it in at the same time as you on the same employee, which is possible as well. All right, so I think that is probably it on the employee side. We've got a payroll and tax record, got direct deposit set up, we got payroll and taxes. I think we'll talk about benefit programs at another time. So that's the employee setup. Questions from anyone on that? All right, so I will then flip back to me again. All right, and so next we'll talk then about the other entities. And so really, again, what we're doing is prepping for payroll. What do I have to have in the system? Got all the admin data set up. Now I've got the employees set up. Now what else? So the next side of that would be the company. So at the company, we would have the work site. So and that's relevant for the work site tax location. So to the question earlier, I've got people working in different states. How do I deal with that? We deal with that with the work site record, which is always tied to the assignment, which we'll talk about in a little bit. We have the billing profile. So the billing profile is contains the information that needs to go on the invoice, and how do we group invoices, right? So it's almost, that can act as like a department or a bill to address, some combination of the two depending on the setup. And that can be very simple or very complicated depending on the customer. And then on the company financial, we'll have things like, what are their invoice credit terms? Is there some sort of credit limit we've given this client? A couple other kind of miscellaneous fields that we would see on the company. Once we have the company set up with the invoice terms, credit limit, that's all optional, but the worksite tax location and billing profile, got to have those to create an order. And then the order will inherit the corporation. Now, anyone on the phone want to give me a guess as to how a job order gets its corporation?
I'd say it comes from the division.
Okay. Someone else? No? No takers? So the corporation comes from the users, the default corp of the default branch for the user that is putting in the order. I'll say that again. The user has a default branch. So Stacy, when you enter a record, your default branch is probably set to the training branch. The training branch has a default corporation of the training corporation. So it's kind of going back 3 levels to figure out this is the user entering the job, this is the branch for that user, and then this is the corp for that branch.
What happens if, and you have a user who needs access to different branches?
So they have access to different branches.
Right.
But the corp's always going to come from their default branch. And that can cause problems. I don't necessarily agree with this approach. That can cause problems because, let's say, well, Stacy's default branch is Dallas, okay? But they have a branch in Louisiana. And so Stacy's helping them out. She's entering a job in Louisiana, and it's a different corporation over there. Well, Louisiana is not set up for, or Texas isn't set up for the workers' comp code that they're using in Louisiana. It's trying to pull her corp for her default branch, not the one that she wants to put it in for, and when she picks the workers' comp code, it's not going to let her create the job order. It's a pretty rare scenario, but it happens, especially with multi-corp setup. In reality, it should come from the corp from the branch that's associated to the company. Is probably what it should be doing. But that's what it does now, unless someone has changed that. I'm not aware of it, which is possible. If it's a one-corp setup, doesn't matter, right? And even in multi-corp setups, it's usually probably okay, but we've got some situations where this does come up. So if you're in support, I'm trying to create this job and I'm picking the workers' comp code and it's telling me it's not in there, but it is. Well, pulling it from their default branch's default corp, it doesn't explicitly ask them what the corp is in the add job order screen. And that's probably the long-term solution to that, right, is just let someone pick it. And I think the reason we haven't done that is because we have to create a different screen for the back office customers, because corp doesn't really exist in the front office. Anyway, so that can cause support problems if you guys ever run into that. Job order will, in the job order creation, you pick the work site and the billing profile. Now, on a brand new client, the first time I go to create a job order for that client, it's going to auto-create a billing profile and a work site for me in the background that will then just inherit the main address that I had on the client record. So if I didn't put address on that client, it's going to make me put that in so it can create the work site and the billing profile. So the good news is you can let the system auto-create job orders and billing profiles, and then you only need to deal with those if they're different than the main company address. So for those of you on the migration team, you don't necessarily have to import a worksite and a billing profile unless you're going to import orders. If you're importing a client that doesn't have any orders, you don't have to create a worksite and a billing profile. The system will auto do that for them when they create it for the first time. Workers' comp code, so it will ask you to pick that when you are creating an order. In the back office system, that is a requirement. In front office only, it is not required, it's optional. I think that's probably it. So I've created my company, I can then create the order, and then I can assign someone, right? So the assignment is really a combination of information about the employee along with information that we've gotten from the order and or the company. Okay, and that assignment is what allows us to have a time card, and a time card is what allows us to have a paid check. So when we're talking about back office training, the assignment has an enormous amount of significance. So let's talk about what's on an assignment then. So from the order, it will inherit the workers' comp code and the work site. Now why am I saying inherit? Because that I can change it. Right? So on an order, I might have, well, they work in the Dallas office and it's 8810, and oh, well, actually this assignment's at a different work site than the other one, even though they were the same order. You can change the workers' comp code and the work site on the assignment, and it can be different from the order. The system allows you to do that. It will initially inherit that. From the company, it will inherit the sales tax setup. So we haven't really talked about sales tax yet. Most states, seems like, have a sales tax, but most of them do not apply that sales tax to staffing services. It's only a few that I've dealt with, and I don't know everything, but it's like Ohio and Pennsylvania, of course, New Mexico. So the only ones I can think of off the top of my head. So in AdaptSuite, you specifically go to the company and say, they're subject to sales tax for Ohio. We would set up an admin. We might go through that in a later session. And then the assignment will inherit that, but you can change it. Okay, a little bit down the line. And then the assignment has no, or at least none that I can see in the application, it has no direct linkage to a billing profile. It's always going through the order to get to the billing profile. So I can't go on an assignment and change the billing profile. So that happens though, right? What on this other department? Well, I need to go to the assignment, go to the associated order, and update that billing profile on that order. Now, once we have an assignment, or really an order, that allows us to look at cost, right? So we have burden. When I worked in staffing, people would talk about payroll burden. Yeah, I didn't really know what it was. Stacy, you're probably more familiar than I was. Do you know what people mean when they say burden? And it's okay if you don't know.
Well, in my experience, burden is a lot of times a corporate office or a home office will put a burden back to the branches for payroll purposes, printing checks, home office staff, and that's just a burden that they would put to pay for certain things.
Okay. So that can't, in Adapt Suite's burden, there is a place that we can put that. But and for any of you on the phone that I see burden, I don't really know what it means, don't feel bad, I didn't either, but let's talk about it. When we look at burden calculation on an order and an assignment in Adapt Suite, what is that? Where does that come from? In the front office only system, we just define it. We just tell it it's 15%, it's 16%, whatever. In Adapt Suite back office, though, it's coming from various things, these components. So what's the FICA rate? And by burden, we mean what? Let me back up. We mean the payroll cost. So even right now, all of us cost bond money more than just what we're paid salary to be employed here. So bond has to pay 6.2% of my wages to the Social Security Administration. They have to match what we have withheld. So that's a burden component right there, automatic 6.2. Medicare, bond has to match 1.45%, same as I do, right? Federal unemployment, and we've already seen where, so FICA and Medicare are hard-coded, or they come from Vertex, or so I'm assuming they're hard-coded. Those rarely change. Federal unemployment, we already saw, we set that up on the corporation, right? And that was the 0.6% up to the $7,000. State unemployment, so we saw we set that up, right, on the managed state taxes area. Workers' comp, you said that, that's right. And then there's an additional burden field on the branch, so that's kind of what you were talking about. I could say for this branch, we're going to ding them an extra 2% to cover various things that the corporate office might do for support-wise that we need to go into our cost calculations. So those are the burden components. So when I go to an order or an assignment, it will calculate a burden, and it's pulling from all of these things. And then that's also reflected on our reports. Now, how does it end up on our reports? We have two types of burden. The first is called accrued, and this is the same as our Staff Suite, and I think Tempware did it this way too. You have accrued burden, which happens at the time card post. So when I post time cards, it looks at all these rates and the wages and everything, and it populates the accrued burden tables in the database. And those are available then for reporting. I don't have to run payroll or billing or anything else. Then we have what we call actual burden, which comes from the employer costing process. So that's an additional process that we can run when we're done with payroll, which will calculate what we call actual burden. What's the difference besides when it happens? The time card posting, the accrued burden, remember we talked about the concept of a wage base? The time card posting process doesn't have any knowledge or doesn't attempt to have knowledge of what someone's year-to-date wages are versus the wage base. So it literally just looks at the rate, the state, and it calculates an unemployment amount. Well, that's important to a lot of staffing firms, as we already discussed. So when someone hits their wage base, they're not having to pay that tax anymore. You know, that means higher margins for them. They might try and employ those candidates more through the rest of the year. So the actual burden, the costing process, since we run that after payroll is done, it will go and look at that and give us what we call actual burden. And it's an actual burden table in the database, and we can run reports off of those. Okay. The other advantage to the costing process is, let's say I had a workers' comp rate that was wrong, or an unemployment rate that was wrong, or it changed and they, it took them until March to get us our new rate, but it was supposed to be effective as of January 1st. Well, the time card posting is done. If you had the wrong rate in there, you can't fix it in the tables, right, without someone going in the database and changing it for you, recalculating. Anne can do it. But the actual, she doesn't mean she will, but she probably could. So the actual, however, the costing, you can clear it. So you can actually, there's a button you can say clear the actual burden tables and then recalculate it using the rates that are now in the system, and it looks at the effective dates and all of that. So that's a nice feature as well. So that's the difference between the two. A lot of our standard reports right now just use the accrued for whatever reason. I think in this 3.6 release we've made the actual burden, which is really what people want, available for customization. Probably long term we'll roll that in some of the other reports. That's a lot of information. Any questions right now, Stacy or anyone else?
No.
Let's look then at the, I want to make you the presenter again.
Okay.
And let's look at the, you've probably at this point, you've created like a company and filled some people.
Yes.
So we don't have to go through all those mechanics. Why don't you just pull up a company that you've worked with, and I'll show you some of these items. Excellent. So Southwest Software, located in Tyler, Texas. What I want you to do is go to the section on the left called Worksite, Subsidiaries and Worksites, I'm sorry. So the subsidiaries portion on the top would be if there's like a company structure, child companies or whatever. We want to focus on the bottom portion of the screen, which is worksites. So we've got kind of the default worksite that was created by the system the first time you created the order. And then you created, looks like, an additional worksite in the system. Now what's important is let's click on either of those worksites, just the worksite name, to take us into the record. So this just has the main, the kind of informational aspects of the worksite. The address, the phone number, where is it located, what's the physical address. Notice there's a menu on the right that says Modify. It's in the black menu bar. And it says Work Location. I kind of wish that said Work Tax Location because that's actually what it is. So let's click on that. This is the Vertex geocode, the worksite tax location for this worksite. So by default, when you create a worksite, either the system does or you explicitly create one, it's going to just pull the state in. And for most states, that's all you need to do. Texas doesn't have any local taxes or even a state tax really. So all it needs is that for unemployment purposes and for tax withholding purposes. In most states, that's the case. So there's really, more often than not, you don't need to deal with this menu unless you're in a state like Indiana that has county, or Ohio that has city, or Pennsylvania that has it down to the city school district level. That is never geocoded, what we call it, beyond the state level by the system. So if you have someone that works in Pennsylvania or in Ohio, you would have to go into the worksite and code it down to the appropriate level, county, city, school district, whatever that might be. And the same thing on the residency. But Kelly, this is how we tell the system what someone's work tax location is versus their resident tax location. And then remember, the assignment is tied to the work site. So if someone's working 3 assignments, those all might be in different places, and that's linked to the work site directly.
Okay. So if they worked in, say, 2 different locations in a week that have different, that would tax their income differently, those separate, that's why we have Vertex, so that those separate calculations can be made within one payroll check?
That's right. So you code it and then let Vertex figure it out.
Yay, okay. All right, cool.
Now, the big thing is someone has to know what they're doing here, right? Like they have to know in Ohio that there's the city tax, and they have to know what to put here. It's not dummy proof, and that's the complaint we get. So, well, how do I know? Well, you have payroll people that you employ to know these things, and when we show you where to put it, right? So someone has to have an understanding of this, and then we have to tell them where to put things, and they have to know to go do it. It is a little bit dummy proof on the Pennsylvania side. It will not let you fill someone if you don't have it coded down all the way to the city school district, because that's required across the board in Pennsylvania. Or in somewhere like Ohio, it can vary from school district to school. Well, sometimes there's a school district tax, sometimes there's not, so you can't really put enforcement in there without making it really cumbersome. All right, so let's cancel or confirm either one on that work tax location. And you can hit close on the right side to close out of that work site. And in the upper right, you have the company financial link, just like you did on the employee. That will auto-activate the first time you create an order, or there's a menu option you can choose to activate it. There's really nothing required in here. It gives you a little bit of a message that says, please complete the necessary information in here. Well, there's nothing you have to complete in here before you move forward. But typically, we print invoice terms on the invoice for people. And so usually someone would want to have that filled in here, maybe have a credit limit. But the system doesn't require those things. Some customers wish it did, but it doesn't. And let's go flip back on the left, click on the client link just to the left there to go back to the main client. And let's go to one of your job orders. So let's go to the job orders section of this company and just click on any of the orders that you might have under there. A contract order as opposed to perm.
Okay.
And this is a contract order, so you're good here. Now in the sorry, I guess it sounded like I meant you clicked on the wrong thing, but you didn't. The job order financial is always activated immediately in the back office. So when I create a contract job or direct job, it just auto activates that. There's nothing you have to do. If you click on the job order financial link in the upper right, this is where you'll see what that corporation is.
Say that again.
Right above the edit button in the upper right. So you have the link that says job order financial. There we go. So it's pretty basic. You've got the corp and the workers' comp code, and you actually see what the workers' comp code is on the front screen too. But this is really just for the corp, essentially. If you need to come in here and change this, you can, or if you need to see what it was, if you're in a multi-corp environment, this is the job order financial area. So it's a very simple screen, but in a multi-corp system, it has a lot of significance, because then this flows down to the assignment, which flows to the time card, and that's how everything's kind of tied together, so it needs to be in the right corp. Let's click back on the contract job link just to the right. So that's where the corp is. If we want to see what work site it's tied to, profile, there's a section on the left that says work site and billing. So again, when on the job order creation screen, you would see add new, and it would pick the work site of the billing profile. Here is where we can change it after the fact if we need to. So if you click on, there's a little pencil button to update the work site. And I think if you do it at the order level and you have active assignments tied to this order, the option to update it for all of the associated assignments, which is, or not, which is a nice feature. We don't have to change that there, but that's where we can update it. I don't know that we'll have time to talk. We'll probably talk more about billing profiles when we get to billing. We'll come back to that, but here's where you can update the billing profile on an order. And then the workers' comp code, we already saw it on the job order financial, but it's also, if you go back to the summary of this job order, there's also a place where you can see it and change it here as well. And what we'll notice, it's kind of right above the job description in the middle of your screen. There's the 8810 office clerical. And what you'll notice is you have the calculated burden right above that. So that order is displaying a combination of all of those rates in the database to calculate that burden. And it really can't until it knows the work site and the workers' comp code, etc. All right, last thing we'll look at, do you have actually anyone assigned to this job order? And you can look at the contractors assigned section on the left, which is about midway down. Looks like no. Well, do you know of any candidates that you might have assigned? And we'll just look at an assignment real quick. Yeah, that's right. If you know a company, you can go to that assignments and placements on the left section, and we'll see if there's anyone assigned.
No.
No. Looks like that's maybe a prospect. Oh, it's a supplier. Actually, if you just go to the assignments menu at the top. There, you've got a couple in there. Just pick one of those from your work stack. That's a direct placement. Let's go to a different one. Maybe one of the... There we go, contract assignment. So same thing, the corporation is going to be in that assignment financial area in the upper right. Remember, you have the job order financial link. You have an assignment financial link right above the edit button. Let's click on that. It's right above the edit button. There you go. See the assignment financial. There you go. So this it's very similar. It's got the corp and the workers' comp code. For those of you that didn't realize it was here, however, you actually have this nice little feature that totals up someone's career hours on this assignment by wage code. So if you've ever wanted to see this, you can see it here. Potential enhancement request for the migration team. Migrate these guys in here when you bring them in. Sales tax information on the left.
Hey, Adam.
Yep.
We probably couldn't because we don't tie the timesheet to the assignment.
Oh, gotcha. And except in the case of Staff Suite for Tempware, right?
Or Impact.
Right. So we could potentially look at that when we have nothing else to do, right?
Right.
So sales tax information, this is where it would pull in. See, there's a reason I'd never really asked for it in, but everyone was on the phone, so I figured I'd throw it out there. Sales tax information, this is where it would inherit it from the company, and we could change it if we needed it to be different. And then last thing, let's flip back to the contract assignment link there. And if you scroll towards the bottom, you can see there the work site is actually just right here on the summary screen, and I could change it if I wanted to. And the workers' comp code is somewhere on here. If you scroll up, there it is, and you could change it there too. Those are both inherited from the order. Again, no billing profile reference anywhere in the assignment. We have to go through the order to get that. So those are really, that's kind of a crash course in setup, right? We've set up the admin side of our business, an employee, a company, an order, an assignment, work site. We haven't really talked about the billing side of it, but we'll kind of come back to that. A lot of information. Any questions, Stacy or anyone else, before we hang it up for today?
I don't think so.
Got it. So next session, really we'll be able to start talking about the batch processing concepts. So how do we enter time cards? What are the different methods? Proofing and posting, looking at reports, running, then probably getting into payroll and then billing if we have time as well. All right, everyone. I hope some of you got some enlightenment from that. Otherwise,
Great.
I hope you were multitasking if it was all remedial. I will talk to I did record this so it's kind of big. I'll figure out where to put it and then share that with somebody so they can distribute it for anyone that missed it or wants to go back and watch it when they're wanting to fall asleep. So I'll talk to you guys on Thursday.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.